This is Intelligence Matters, sponsored by Orbis.
General John J. Raymond was the first chief of space operations for the United States Space Force. In this role, he served as a senior uniformed space officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of all U.S. Space Forces. General Raymond has had a distinguished career commanding at various levels, including squadron, group, wing, numbered Air Force, Major Command, and Combatant Command levels. We'll be right back with General Raymond and a discussion about space and national security after a quick break. I'm Andy McCreadis, and this is Intelligence Matters.
Rooted in the U.S. intelligence and special operations communities, Orbis is investing today in the people and capabilities needed to deliver national security tomorrow. Data is everywhere and easy to acquire. The intelligence mission requires new thinking and new approaches to make the most of that data. That's where Orbis is making a difference. Unburdened by legacy business models, we're building the intelligence business of the future. We provide highly empowered, creative teams that deliver impactful outcomes and asymmetric capabilities for our clients worldwide. If you're looking for a strategic ally with experience navigating the complexities of the modern information environment, or if you envision contributing your unique experiences to elevate global security, then we're ready for you. Connect with us at intelligencematters@orbis.com. That's intelligencematters@orbis.com. Uncover the extraordinary with Orbis.
Welcome back. Jay, welcome to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on. So I thought maybe we could start with you sharing a bit about your background up until the time you became the first chief of space operations.
Well, thanks, Andy, for the privilege of being here, and really look forward to the conversation. I grew up in a military family. My whole family was Army. My great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad all were Army officers, all went to West Point. So I knew I wanted a life of service. I went the ROTC route. I went to Clemson University. And I remember when I was at Clemson in 1982, the general in command of Air Force Space Command, a brand new command, had just stood up, came out and talked. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, that would be a great command to be part of. Well, I got commissioned in 1984, largely spent 35 and a half years doing space things. I commanded at the squadron, group, wing, numbered Air Force level, and then in 2016, commanded Air Force Space Command, that same command that then General Hardinger came and talked to us about when I was a student at Clemson. From 2016 until 2019, it was a really dynamic time. There was a big debate going on what the National Security Organization for Space should be. It really heated up in 2016 with two congressmen, Congressman Rogers and Congressman Cooper, beginning that debate. And in August of 2019, the United States stood up U.S. Space Command, which was a combatant command, which is a combatant command. It used to be up in 1980. It stood up in 1985, stood down in 2002 when we moved space into U.S. Strategic Command. But after the debate on the Organization of National Security Space heated up in 2019, we reestablished that command. And I had led that reestablishment and led that command for its first year of existence. And so that kind of brings you up to December of 2019 when we established the Space Force.
Yeah, Jay, earlier in my career, I was headed out to be the agency rep out to Space Command, Colorado Springs. Right. But that's when the president's briefer job came open, and took that job, of course. But at that time, didn't Space Command move to Omaha, or? Yeah.
So what happened was Space Command was up in again, it stood up in '85, and then the 9/11 attacks happened, and the nation decided at that time we needed to stand up a command focused on Homeland Security, obviously based on the results of the effects of 9/11. And so we stood up Northern Command. So back when you were engaging with U.S. Space Command, the commander of U.S. Space Command was also the commander of NORAD, was also the commander of Air Force Space Command. when they stood up Northcom, they took space and moved space to U.S. Strategic Command, because at the time there was a law that said you could only have 9 combatant commanders. And so they stood down U.S. Space Command. Largely the Cold War was over. The threat to space had gone away. And the nation, if you looked at what happened to U.S. Strategic Command at that time, they put space, cyber, missile defense, countering weapons of mass destruction, ISR. There was a lot of things that went into U.S. Strategic Command, and the thought that command would be able to integrate all of these strategic capabilities to an effect that would be beneficial to our nation's security.
Jay, given what you just said, so you're a space junkie, even though I think you told me at one point you just sort of don't watch science fiction or space science fiction.
I keep that under wraps, but I'm not a big science fiction guy. But I am a space junkie. I remember I lived in West Point, New York, when I was in first, second, and third grade. And in that window of time, that's when man first walked on the moon. And I remember sitting on my living room floor watching that landing and walking on the moon. And I remember turning around, going to my dining room table and building an Apollo rocket that my parents had gotten me. My dad at that time also taught astronomy at West Point. And so I would get to go out, he would teach summer school, and get to go out at night and look through the telescopes at planets. So I've always had a passion for space. I was just really lucky that my passion that what I got to do in the Air Force, at least initially before transitioning to the Space Force, what I got to do in the Air Force matched that passion.
Jay, why don't you tell us a little bit about setting up the Space Force, maybe how that came about, and what you saw as some of the early challenges.
Yeah, so the establishment of the Space Force had been discussed for almost 30 years. I think it went back to the Rumsfeld Commission. Back before Rumsfeld became the Secretary of Defense, and it had been kind of low-level discussions, if you will, on the back burner until 2016, late 2016. And at that time, as I mentioned, Congressman Rogers from Alabama and Congressman Cooper from Tennessee, who were the chairman and the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee Strategic Forces Subcommittee, really pushed to have space become an independent service. The thought was that one, the Air Force wasn't doing enough in space, that China was moving very, very fast. We needed to have a dedicated service to be able to stay ahead of the threat. You needed to have an organization that had the center of mass inside of the department to help bring 60 different organizations together that could all say no, but nobody could say yes. You needed somebody to be able to integrate joint capabilities, integrate space into joint capabilities better. And then the thought was to be able to do all of that and to be able to capitalize on a domain that has changed significantly, that you needed to have this independent service. And so if you were to go back and look at the series of National Defense Authorization Acts that came out in 17, 18, and then 19, what you will see is a series of steps that they took in each of those years, building towards the ultimate 2019 National Defense Authorization Act. So you saw them take organized, train, and equip responsibilities away from the Secretary of the Air Force. You saw them say that General Raymond has to serve 6 years rather than 3 years. They doubled the length of my service as the Air Force Space Command commander. And they were just taking these incremental steps. And then in December of 19, the National Defense Authorization Act of 20 was signed. It was signed on the 20th of December of 2019, and that was the actual birth certificate of the Space Force. That was the document that the President signed that established the Space Force and said, effective immediately, there is a thing called a Space Force. And on that same day, when he signed the law and made that speech, he also appointed me to be the first member of the Space Force as the Chief of Space Operations, the CSO. What he didn't say was that I was the only member of the Space Force for quite a while. The old Army adage, the Army of one. Well, that was really, I brought that to life because there was really truly a service of one at that time.
Yeah. So Jay, I mean, remembering that time period after the creation of Space Force, or I guess it was met in some quarters with mixed mixed reactions. Let's put it that way, right? So now, a few years on, where do you think we are today? Do you still see that same kind of?
Yeah, I think I think there's a couple things. One, the United States decided to take an opportunity to stand up a Space Force and to do so while we were still the best in the world in space. And short of a crisis, it's really hard to make change inside of a large bureaucracy. So I think, people were saying, "Hey, the Air Force has been doing this for a long time. Why do we need to make this? Why do we need to make this change?" It is clear that it was the right answer. There is no doubt it was the right answer. If you look at what has happened by elevating from major command inside of the Air Force to its own independent service, what happens is you elevate the voice of the service chief and the service. You have a stronger role in requirements. You have a stronger role in budget. You have a stronger role in building international relationships. You have a stronger role of integrating space across the Department of Defense. You have a stronger role in making sure that space is integrated into all the strategic documents and all the strategic processes of the department. And so, looking back on it, there is without hesitation, I will say it was the absolute right answer. Now, you might say he's a little close to it because he ran it for the first 3 years, but I have heard that repeatedly from everybody that what had been a little bit of skepticism has gone away, especially inside of the department, inside of the interagency partners that we work with. There's no hesitation at all, and you just have to look at what's happened. We've gone from one person in the Space Force to now. Don't quote me on this because I've been out of it for a while, but I imagine we're inching our way up closer to 20,000 people in the Space Force. Still significantly smaller than the other services, but we built it to be light, lean, agile, to be able to go fast, be able to capitalize on commercial industry, and to really focus not on the support part of the services, but on the mission part, which is obviously ensuring that space is available for our way of life and space is available for our way of war. And so, again, the people that we're attracting have the quality of the people we're attracting has gone through the roof. We have more people knocking on our door than we can take. The budget has doubled in its first 3 years of existence. We've got new doctrine. We are better integrated with the Army, Navy, they even better integrated with the Air Force, which would be hard to believe as we were part of the Air Force, and better integrated with the Marine Corps. So we became the 18th member of the IC, so we're better integrated with the intelligence community than we had been in the past. And so by all accounts, the establishment was the right answer, and it's going well.
So, Jay, this raises some questions. So how do you envision the future of space as a war-fighting domain, along with air, sea, land?
Right.
The traditional ones people think of when they think about these kind of domains. Yeah,
well, clearly space is a warfighting domain like those other domains that you talked about. I think what has changed, though, in warfare is that you're not going to be successful if you're just operating in any single domain. It's a multi-domain effort, and it's the activities that you do on the air or on the ground or on the sea could have an impact on what's going on in space and vice versa. So clearly it's a warfighting domain, but we think about it more as a multi-domain approach. Space is a huge force multiplier for our joint forces. If you were to watch any of the shows that have been on live streaming, like the Pacific or the one that just came out, Masters of the Air. If you look at just that last one, Masters of Air, if you look at how many bombers it took in World War II to go after one target, and how many planes and people we lost, and just really the few amount of times where we actually were able to destroy the target, that's what life was like without space. With space, you take one bomber off, with space integrated into it, you take one bomber off, I'm making this up, drop 60-something weapons. They all go after 60 different targets, and they're all perfect strikes. Well, how do you do that? You do that by integrating space. It's a huge force multiplier. If you were to look at the number of bombers we have in our Air Force today, we don't have the kind of numbers of bombers that they had back in World War II. You just couldn't do it. And so, on the one hand, as space is a warfighting domain, it helps all of the other services be more effective with the force structure that they have. We do not have a big enough Army, a big enough Navy, big enough Air Force, big enough Marine Corps if we didn't have space. On the other hand, our adversaries are also building space capabilities for their own use. Like China, they have a very robust set of space capabilities, and they're using those capabilities to detect, track, target, and therefore have the ability to engage and strike our forces on the ground and on the air and on the sea. And so for both of those cases, one, the critical enabling that it provides our service, and two, the threat that it also could provide if adversaries have it. It is clear it has become a warfighting domain. What makes it a little different? It's not quite as easy to get to space as it is to fly on an airplane or to sail on the sea. Operations happen a little faster. Just to stay in space, a satellite goes 17,500 miles an hour, or it re-enters. It's a little harder to attribute because you can't see it than it is for other domains. Clearly, with the force structure we have today, there's a more of a first mover advantage than in other domains, and clearly it is a global domain that has with that provides opportunities and some challenges.
Jay, you mentioned China, and so maybe we spend a minute or two talking about the threats. The DNI, in her annual threat assessment in March, said that by 2030, China will rival some of our U.S. space capabilities. And of course, we just saw the Russian launch of what the Pentagon is calling a counterspace weapon. So this is all, in some ways, startling because for the last half century, let's say, space has been, or the last 50 years, space has been the domain of the United States. And all of a sudden, that's beginning to change. How do you see this shaping up?
Well, space started, our involvement in space started back in the 50s, and it was really great power competition between us and the Soviet Union at the time. That's not the case today. Today, you have high school students that are launching satellites into orbit. I went to Thomas Jefferson High School here in town, and went and spoke to that high school before I retired, and they took me up to their satellite lab where they were building CubeSats. So you think about it, it went from great power, U.S. and then Soviet Union, to now high school. And because of the reduced barriers to entry into space, largely because of commercial launch reducing the prices of going into space, you now have lots of more, it's become much more congested, it's become much more competitive, and it's become much more contested. And so we, as you said, pretty much had a lock on integrating space into everything that we do as a joint force, and it's provided us incredible capability. Our adversaries, both China and Russia and others, but primarily China and Russia, have been observing the benefit that we get by integrating space into everything that we do, and they didn't like what they saw. And so they're doing two things. As I discussed, they're building their own capabilities. If you were to look today, I think China has over 900 ISR satellites in orbit that's watching everything that we do. But they're also building capabilities to deny us our use of space. So they're trying to reap the benefits of space for their own use while denying us the benefits that we gain. And so everything from reversible jammers of GPS and communication satellites to directed energy weapons, think lasers that can blind satellites. There's satellites on orbit that have a dual-use purpose. There's a satellite that China has that has a robotic arm. There's a satellite that Russia launched in 2019 that I call the nesting doll satellite. It's a satellite inside of another satellite, inside of another satellite. And so a satellite launches, it opens up, another satellite comes out, and it opens up, and then a projectile comes out designed to kill a U.S. satellite. And then I've read in the paper, like you have read, that Russia has just launched another capability that is viewed as a counterspace capability as well. Both China and Russia also have missiles that can launch from the ground and blow up a satellite in minutes. They both demonstrated that. China did it in 2007. Russia did it here more recently. There's cyber threats to the space domain, largely satellites or large computer systems in space. And obviously that cyber is a important to the protection of those capabilities as well. And then I've also read, and I'm sure others have seen on the news, that there's thought that Russia might put a nuclear device in space as well. And so that full spectrum from reversible jamming to kinetic destruction is a spectrum of threats that is real today and something that we should be concerned about.
Jay, you just touched on something I just want to ask about. I think as you talk about the challenges in space, sometimes people might think, it's just satellite versus satellite or a laser or whatever. But the cyber part is sort of interesting because these systems are all vulnerable to cyber attacks, just like everywhere else. Is that a mandate also for Space Force?
It is.
And how does that sort of fit in?
Yeah. So what we did when we designed the Space Force, we brought 5 career fields into that service. We brought space operations, space acquisition, engineering, intelligence, and cyber. And all 5 of those career fields, if you will, we felt had a critical role in us being able to have space superiority today and into the future. And so one of the benefits that we've gotten from establishing the Space Force is we've strengthened our cyber capabilities inside of that service. And we have built organic cyber forces. We have integrated them with our operational forces. So today, if you were to go, for example, to the GPS squadron and look at out at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado and look on the floor, you'll see a cyber expert on the GPS crew that's operating that constellation, making sure that they understand the cyber terrain, making sure that they can detect any potential cyber threats and be able to handle any threats if they were detected and materialized. And so that's an area that we are extremely focused on. It's a constant 24/7 job, as you well know, but it's something we put a lot of emphasis on. Because we need to be able to protect our capabilities for everybody to be able to use.
So what you're describing is a race.
Yes, sir.
Right? How does the U.S. stay ahead? And then maybe, as part of that answer, connectedly, I guess, what role, and you touched a little bit on this, what role do you see private companies playing
Absolutely.
In the future of, space exploration and space defense?
Yeah, we stay ahead. One of the things we did was just set up a Space Force, dedicated to making sure that we could stay ahead of that threat. As I mentioned earlier, we stood this up while we were still the best in the world in space, and we still are. But that was step 1. Step 2, I think, is I talked about the quality of the people that we're attracting. I think our strength is in our people. We are getting an incredible capable workforce that's coming in, Rhodes Scholars, incredible leaders. We've got national champions in track. I mean, the quality of the people that we're assessing is not that we were bad in the past, but it is better. I think we stay ahead of this competition by having strong partnerships with the intelligence community. Again, becoming the 18th member of the IC, we've got a really strong partnership with the National Reconnaissance Office. A significant amount of our Guardians work at the NRO. We have strong partnerships with our international partners, and they are growing and maturing. Historically, we haven't had those partnerships. Those partnerships were largely done through NASA. But today, that's not the case. And so with our Five Eyes partners, plus France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Norway, we have really beefed up our international partnerships. And it's not just data sharing partnerships anymore. We operate together, we train together, we war game together, we build capabilities together. And so those are also really, really strong and critical to staying ahead. And then to your final point, we're also developing really strong relationships with commercial industry. as I was a member of the Joint Chiefs, as I sat around the table with my fellow members of the Joint Chiefs, I kept thinking in my head, I'm lucky. I've got this really, I've got this commercial industry that's really flourishing, that I can try to leverage, and I didn't see that in the other domains. And so, innovative small companies that were really helping us do what we need to do in the space domain, I thought was a really important partnership, and we worked really hard to strengthen that. One of the things that I have come to have a greater appreciation for is this thing called the Valley of Death, where you have innovative companies that are doing really critical things, but how do you get them and the capabilities that they're developing to leap over the Valley of Death and get onto a government contract? It's really, really difficult. The Space Force is doing a lot of work to try to make it easier for commercial industry. They've stood up a commercial front door. We've stood up commercial integration cells on our operation centers. We're sharing information more broadly, but I don't think we've yet cracked the nut on filling in the valley. We're just trying to make it a little easier to navigate through the valley. I think the department really needs to figure out what can we do to better leverage commercial industry, because I view our commercial industry as a national advantage, and we've got to do everything we can do to capitalize on it.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with General Jay Raymond.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Jay, something interesting in what you said. One of the conferences that I attended, it's startups and that work in the national security space. 5 years ago, you might have run across one space company.
Right.
Now it's, every fifth company has something,
right,
some space connection. So it's the point that it's flourishing is just spot on.
Yeah, it really is. People say that there's going to be $1 trillion space budget between here and the lunar surface, by the end of this decade. People say that the first trillionaire will be the person that can mine minerals on the moon or asteroids and bring that back. There is a lot of commercial interest in this business, and I think it offers us an advantage. I think. Just look at what's going on in Ukraine today. Ukraine is not a spacefaring country by any means, but if you look at how they have used commercial space, whether it's Starlink to stay connected, whether it's ISR to be able to have better understanding of the Russian force laydown, if you will, or whether it's using GPS, which is free of charge for everybody, they are using capabilities to great benefit for themselves, and I think people see that, and I think as more and more commercial capabilities become real, it's going to be kind of the great equalizer, because you're going to be able to tap into space even if you're not a spacefaring country.
Jay, I was remiss. There's a question I probably should have asked earlier, but Space Force has a broader mandate beyond just national security, right? There's other aspects of space that, exploration, scientific, right, and Space Force fits in there. Can you just describe that briefly?
Yeah, so there, NASA is largely the scientific and exploration group. They're the people that do that. We obviously are on the national security side, but there is a close partnership where we work closely with NASA. We help protect the International Space Station. We act as the space traffic control for the world, and if there's anything that's going to hit the International Space Station, we warn NASA, and then NASA will reposition, if you will, the International Space Station to avoid collision. That happens on average roughly about 3 times a year. So the International Space Station will maneuver to keep from hitting a piece of debris. We have astronauts that we send over, like all the other services do, from the Space Force to serve at NASA. We have an astronaut, Nick Hague, who's getting ready to launch in August up to the International Space Station. We share some training materials that NASA had in simulators. We've collaborated with them on that as well. It's in both of our interests. And I should have said this earlier on, what do we do to stay ahead of this competition? We also help set norms of behavior. What do we consider safe and professional behavior in space, and try to shape that for the rest of the world rather than being shaped by our adversaries. And so you'll see us and our closest partners, including NASA, help with that narrative on how are we going to operate in this domain in a safe and professional way, and be models for others. I'm not naive to think that, if we set these standards, that everybody's going to follow them. But for those that don't follow them, it's going to be really clear to figure out who's running the red lights, if you will. And so there's lots of ways where we collaborate with NASA, but they are two different focuses. NASA, largely exploration and science; DoD, largely national security.
So, Jay, how would you define success or winning, if you will, for Space Force? What would that be?
I think you define success in that we're able to deter conflict from beginning or extending into space. That's what we're all about. We do not want to get into a conflict that in the space domain. Lots of people have thought that if there is a future war, that it might begin in space and cyber, because again, it's harder to attribute. I think some of the reasons why Russia is launching and China is launching the capabilities that they are as a deterrent factor, trying to deter us. And so I think, again, success means not getting into a conflict, being able to maintain the domain, to keep the domain safe and sustainable for future military operations, future exploration, future commerce. And if we can do that, if we can deter conflict from beginning or extending into space, I really believe we have an opportunity to then deter conflict from spilling over into other domains. Because I'm convinced that if Russia or China knew that they could not take away our space capabilities, they would have to think twice about whether they would decide to get into a conflict, because it'd be really hard to beat us if we're got that full complement of capabilities that we can continue to use to our advantage.
Right. That's a great point. Are there any particular innovations that in space that you've seen recently that that have impressed you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has impressed me is not as much the technological innovations, it's the business innovations. And if you look at what's going on, the capabilities that we operate today in the space domain are largely very large, very exquisite, very expensive, and very hard to defend satellites. They were built for a peaceful, benign domain without a threat. Largely because of the success of commercial industry, and the example that I'll use is SpaceX and the Starlink constellation. Rather than having a handful of very exquisite capabilities, what they have done is they have proliferated in low Earth orbit smaller, cheaper, less exquisite capabilities. So I don't know the exact number of satellites they have on orbit today, but I'm assuming it's over 6,000 satellites or so in the Starlink constellation in low Earth orbit. What you see the Department of Defense doing now is doing what we call force design work and trying to figure out what the force structure is. How should we design the force structure, the space force structure, to be able to effectively operate in a contested warfighting domain. And so the first one that we did was our missile warning, missile tracking force structure. Today, there's small numbers of again, very large, very exquisite, best in the world satellites that are up in geosynchronous orbit, but they're very small in numbers. They're designed to detect a ballistic missile. They're not designed to detect hypersonics that are maneuvering capabilities. To do that, you really have to go lower. The other thing is, if you only have a handful of satellites in geosynchronous orbit and adversaries have capabilities to deny you the access to those satellites, if they were able to do that, you lose a large swath of coverage, if you will, over any part of the world. And so what we have designed now is a multi-orbit architecture with many, many more satellites to more effectively accomplish the missile warning mission as new, for example, hypersonic threats and cruise missile threats come about. But by doing so, you also complicate the targeting of an adversary, because rather than just having a small number, they now have hundreds that they have to try to engage. And so one of the innovations that I see the department doing, and I'm really excited about, is making this pivot, largely capitalizing on commercial innovations to have more of an assembly line approach that allows you to change the risk calculus, if you will, in this new business model. It also allows you to integrate more effectively with commercial industry, and also allows you to integrate maybe more effectively with our allies and our partners. On the technology side, I really believe as these smaller satellites, as we move that way, the challenge with the smaller satellites all along has been, we're not good enough mentality, and that they're small and they're not as exquisite and they can't do everything. But boy, if you couple that, and I'll tell you today they are good enough, but if you couple that with AI, I think you have a really powerful combination there. And so I think AI integration into national security space is going to be an area that's going to be really important, and something I'm really excited to see how it matures.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. This is it's an exciting time, and this intersection is that right at the cutting edge.
Right.
So Jay, let me just shift gears on you for a moment. We have a lot of students, both graduate students and undergraduate students, who listen to the podcast. Many of whom aspire to work in national security, or maybe in this case, Space Force. What advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, again, Andy, I really appreciate the opportunity to come up and chat with you. For those students that are out there, there is not a more exciting time to be in the space business than it is right now. I mean, it is in all sectors, whether it's national security with the Space Force, whether it's civil with NASA going back to the moon in this decade and then hopefully on to Mars later, or whether in commercial space with all that's going on across the commercial landscape. There's just a really exciting time to be involved in it. As we established the Space Force, again, we built this to be very light, very lean, very agile, be on the cutting edge of technology. We're the most selective service that there is. You have to apply. You get interviewed. Everybody's handpicked because we're small. We can do this. Everybody's handpicked to come in. The caliber of people that we're getting is just, again, really, really high. And so what I would say to those that are interested, if you think you're good enough, apply. We'd love to have you. And we're building the service to be able to also be more to have more opportunities to do part-time and full-time. So if you want to come work for the Space Force for a while, you can do that. We could make you go part-time. You can go work for commercial industry and then come back. You can go work for NASA and come back. And so I think there's huge opportunities for young folks. We take largely STEM focus, but not exclusively. We open it up to any major. We need a full complement, but I would say the majority come out of the STEM career field. And again, it's an exciting place to work, and I would really urge folks to think about it if they're interested. I would also take a moment to, whether you're interested in space or not, I would also encourage people to think about serving their country. I think service is important, and there's multiple ways you can serve. And so every time I get a chance to talk in front of a group of young people, I tell them to consider that. We are in, as you know, probably the most complex strategic environment that we've faced in a long time, maybe ever. It requires our best and brightest to help us think through these challenges. And there's plenty of ways to serve, and I would encourage people to think about how they might be able to give back to their country.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Jay. I couldn't agree more. But before we leave, I do have to ask you about the insignia.
Oh yeah.
That many of our listeners will recognize from another context. But how did you come up with the insignia?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So when we stood up, I told you in 2019, December 20th. I became a guardian. We didn't call them guardians at the time. We were space professionals because we hadn't yet picked the name. There's airmen, sailors, soldiers, Marines. Now we're called guardians. But we really started with nothing. And so the first thing I needed to do was have a uniform to wear, and I needed to have a seal so we could get a flag and we could start having some kind of identity to rally around. And so our public affairs staff put together four different options for seals. And then day to day, the Air Force wears a digital camouflage uniform called OCPs. It's the same uniform the Army wears. The name tape for the Army is in black thread. The name tape for the Air Force is in brown thread. So I thought, I'll just come up with a different color thread. We'll just, blue or silver, and change my name to that, and I'm good to go. So I went into the White House with two decisions to be had. Mr. President, I need a uniform to wear, and I need a seal so I can start building an identity. And I showed him I had on a hanger my OCP shirt that had Raymond in black thread, Raymond in brown thread, Raymond in blue thread, and Raymond in silver thread. And I said, Mr. President, if I was in the Army, this is what I wear. In the Air Force, this is what I wear. What do you think, blue or silver? And the President said, I like blue. I said, I like blue. So that's how the uniform came about. I'll tell you a funny story. I was in the hotel. I was living in a hotel in Crystal City, the Embassy Suites in Crystal City. The very first day I wore the uniform, which was the next day after that decision was made, I get on the elevator on the 11th floor and start down, and the elevator stops on the 9th floor, and this lady gets on the elevator, and she is looking at me like I'm, something is wrong, and staring at me the whole way down. And I get down to the bottom floor, and the door opens, and she said, "Excuse me, sir." I said, I don't think I've ever met anybody in the Space Force before, and I don't think I haven't seen the uniform. I said, well, ma'am, I'm the only person in the Space Force, and this is the first day I'm wearing it. So you're not wrong. On the seal side, public affairs came up with 4 different seals. We picked the seal, and then it was released, and everybody said it looked like Star Trek. If you go back and look at the Air Force Space Command logo, which was done back in 1982, all the components in that seal that we picked are in that seal. The Delta has been the symbol for space since the 50s. The orbit, the globe, the North Star, Polaris, all of those are in there. We just changed it up so it wasn't an exact copy of Air Force Space Command. Everybody said we stole it from Star Trek. We actually had, those symbols were actually done before we started using the Delta, before Star Trek was even around. So they actually stole it from us. And then after the first year after we did a naming contest, if you will, and crowdsource, what are we going to call ourselves? We had 700 different options for names. We had linguists helping us. We had everybody helping us, and it came down to a couple names. One of them was Guardians. Air Force Space Command in 1982 adopted a motto, Guardians of the High Frontier. And so as a nod to our legacy from Air Force Space Command, we went with Guardians. We thought it was a great term to shows what we do for our nation. Everybody ridiculed us that we stole that from Guardians of the Galaxy. We didn't. So,
it's no win situation.
There's no win situation. But I will tell you, the seal has gone. People are actually loving it. And if you were to go, there's a little store in the Pentagon, on the concourse level of the Pentagon, and they sell swag from different services. And I went in there to buy a Space Force T-shirt, and the lady that owned the store said, General Raymond, are you the head of the Space Force? I said, I am. She says, oh, I can't thank you enough. You're the only thing that kept our store alive during COVID, because everybody came to buy Space Force stuff. So it was flying off the shelves. And so all of those things, which were necessary things to do, 50% of the people loved it. Outside in the social media world, 50% of the people loved it, 50% of the people hated it. But inside the service, it's people have really embraced it and have really liked the branding, if you will, of the service, and it's become very popular.
That's fantastic, Jay. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This is a really great discussion.
Oh, Andy, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity. It's a real privilege to be with you. And again, thanks. And for those that are interested, I would highly encourage throwing your name in the hat. It's a great place to work, and I'm really proud of the service as it has matured.
That was General J. Raymond. I'm Andy McCreadis. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters. And you can always reach us at intelligencematterspod@gmail.com.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry and Sophia Rubin. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.